Hey, George. Welcome back, man.
Hey, thanks for having me here. Nice to see you in person.
Yeah, for real, man. You were one of the very early episodes of the podcast, and it was one of my favorites by far. That was a great discussion, and we could have continued for a long time. So I'm really glad I came over here, this side of the pond, to reprise the conversation, keep going.
Well, I know the next guest, and I won't spoil it for your viewers, but I'm a big fan of her, and I'm very excited to hear your conversation with her too.
I am as well. This is, like I said, this is a high cognitive load day. I posted on Twitter this morning. It feels like it's a lot, and I really was stressed because this is one of the first in-person ones I've done, and obviously you've seen the circus sideshow of me trying to set up the audio and lighting. So we'll get better.
Part of the process.
We'll get better. So anyway, I wanted to talk to you first and foremost about the story you posted about the Philippines circumcision.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's start off something light, right? Let's tiptoe in.
Yeah. So in the Philippines, circumcision of boys is more or less 100% of the male population. And it's not like in America, although in America it's barbaric as well. But in the Philippines, it does somehow get worse. They have a thing called tuli. I may not be pronouncing that correct, Tuli, but it's sort of a ritual rite of passage for boys into manhood, and that's when they're circumcised. And it's done with like a cut-throat razor by someone who's like more of a cultural figure than a qualified medical professional. Although I'd argue there's no one in the world could perform a surgery without any risks, so it's not like it's much better. But it's done by a Manyong, I believe that's pronounced correctly, and he basically uses a cut-throat razor over a wooden sort of stump from a tree, slices off the boy's foreskin, and then the boy goes and washes the wound in a river. So clearly it's not really washing because it's you're just going to get infections, and there are infections. Again, even in America where you have like state-of-the-art healthcare, more than 100 boys die every single year from circumcision, normally from infection or like a blood clot. So God knows what happens to the boys that wash their wound in a dirty river in the Philippines. The deaths must be significantly higher. But even greater danger to these boys is literal trauma. So of the boys who experience tuli the traditional way, I think about 70% of them meet the DCIM criteria for PTSD. So a huge amount. So it's basically the systemic traumatization of Filipino boys. And then of the boys who have it done in Philippines, not the traditional way, in the American way for a medical professional, that's about 50% show signs of PTSD. It's not quite as severe and not quite as high, but half of those boys will also show signs of trauma. And like I said, that more or less happens to every single boy in the Philippines. So yeah, state-sponsored traumatization of half of the population of the entire country. So that is not the lightest start to a podcast, but an important one.
It definitely is, and it shocked me, just the age that they undergo this, because I think we know it's a much more traumatic when things are developed and they're a little bit older, and they're more cognizant of what's going on. Like,
it's like boys, even in America, like infant male circumcision on babies. Just think that's like the first few days of life, and their first experience of life is having their consent totally taken away from them, having an extremely painful procedure done to their sex organs. So it's sort of like a sexual assault. It's extremely violent, has virtually no medical benefits whatsoever. It's done overwhelmingly for cultural and religious reasons or aesthetic reasons. And that's your first experience of life, is violence at the hands of the medical world at the request of your parents. So I feel like straight away, boys are sort of marinated in violence in that way, and many others, which I'm sure we'll discuss. And like that, no child should start their life off by having their bodily integrity violated or human rights taken away. And like I'm not religious, but no religion supersedes human rights, and that I don't care what religion that is. It doesn't mean you get to invade the life of a child or the body of a child, certainly not your own child. And it leads to deaths and trauma and many other things which we can talk about.
Yeah, got it. And another thing that was interesting, I noticed, you post this, and by the way, I learned so much from your Instagram account. Everybody, please check out George's Instagram account. It's awesome. Is the WHO classifying females who get voluntary genital piercings as FGM victims? Yeah. Tell me more about that. That is...
Yeah, well, the World Health Organization guidelines, which have been adopted by the National Health Service, so NHS, consider a woman, an adult woman, through her own choice, having her vagina pierced or labia pierced or clitoris pierced, a woman doing that from her own choice, she's also considered a victim of FGM. And I suppose the idea is that you don't know whether she's been coerced into doing it. So I am sympathetic towards that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but a baby boy in this country strapped down, screaming and having like most of the nerve endings of his penis cut away without need and certainly without consent, that's not a crime in any capacity. That's not only not a crime, but it's widely done. Not so much in the UK, but it's normalised. And like, why is a woman, a fully grown woman, making a choice about her getting her genitals pierced? Why is she a victim of FGM, and yet a boy who's got no consent whatsoever being violated in a way that's even worse than that? Like, she's given more human rights than he is, and like, it's just very frustrating because everyone talks about how men and boys have autonomy, bodily autonomy, and there are ways in which they have autonomy of their bodies that women don't, but they don't have autonomy. And like, America is a great example. Like, most men and boys are circumcised in America. They've all had their bodily autonomy invaded, in my opinion, apart from the very few cases where it's actually medically needed, which is, you know, quite a small percentage of all circumcisions.
Right. It's an interesting thing. I wonder, to Steelman, the idea behind the WHO guidelines and NHS adopting them, maybe what might behind it is how horrific FGM is for females. There's certain types, right? And I know you know the differences. I'm not smart enough to keep track of them, but there's some that are very, very extreme. I think removal of the clitoris and inability for complete sexual dysfunction. All sexual function is removed from the child in perpetuity, right? Which is ghastly, right? Not to say that male circumcision isn't ghastly. It certainly is. But I wonder if maybe that is why they're taking such a hard stance on this.
It's difficult. FGM is like a broad collective term for lots of different surgeries, all of them which are barbaric, and all of them are illegal in practically all the countries in the world. There's a few left. I think South Sudan made it FGM illegal recently, which is great, but I mean, more or less everywhere it is illegal and abhorrent, horrible. Like, there are a few things worse to do to a person than female genital mutilation, and some of them are truly horrible and not comparable to male circumcision, but some of them are. And sometimes male circumcision is actually worse than FGM, depending on the context. So there's various different types. So, I mean, if you want to go into the nuts and bolts of it, type 1A FGM, which I believe is the most common, is also the least severe. And that's any sort of medical altering, surgical altering or removal of the prepuce, which is the clitoral hood, which is the exact same biological tissue as the male foreskin. So type 1 FGM is comparable to male circumcision because it is literally the removal or altering of the exact same tissue. And people say, well, it's not the same because FGM is done for the reason you described. It's basically traditionally done to de-sex girls and stop girls and women having any sort of sexual pleasure. But that a lot of circumcision came from that as well. That was one of the biggest causes of circumcision, apart from the whole religious thing and the totally unscientifically backed hygienic reasons.
Right.
It was brought to America by Dr. John Kellogg of Kellogg's Cornflakes fame, like the actual guy who invented Kellogg's Cornflakes. And I'm still waiting for Kellogg's to be cancelled for this. And he brought it to America because he wanted to rid America of the vice of teenage masturbation. He was not a big fan of boys or girls masturbating, and he wanted to de-sex them, and he thought that circumcision, the pain of circumcising a boy without anesthesia, and he was very intent on it not being about anesthesia because he thought the pain would have a sultry effect on the boys and it would basically stop them from masturbating, because it actually does take away like I said, more than half the nerve endings and the most sensitive part of the penis are removed. So it absolutely does that, and that was partly the motivation of circumcision too. So I'd say it's comparable to FGM. Ultimately, it doesn't need to be comparable at all. It doesn't matter. Both are barbaric. Both should be illegal. The difference is that FGM is illegal in a universal way, in any case, against all people, but male circumcision is, like I said, widely accepted, especially in America, and especially in sort of Asian and Middle Eastern countries.
Yeah. And I think you've talked about some of the reasons behind it in trying to move forward beyond that. I think that you've discussed male disposability.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That this idea, and I think it is a biologically valid concept that there's infinite sperm, there's very few eggs, right? So the value of women historically has been very high, particularly when you've called out, like, hey, whether if there's a tribe and you kill 99% of the guys, I mean, you can still repopulate, right?
Yeah.
But
it's a very fruitful soundbite for podcasts. Some sort of insert hypothetical thought experiment about tribes, and the idea is, let me do it for you. It's like, if there are two tribes and one tribe sends all the men to war and 90% of his men die, you can repopulate the tribe because one man can impregnate, hypothetically hundreds of women and repopulate that tribe. But if a tribe loses 90% of its women, it loses 90% of its reproductive value and capacity, and the tribe probably be wiped out. And I get it. That's what everyone falls back to. And I'm always like, we don't live in tribes anymore. Like, look at where we are right now. We're in London in a skyscraper, surrounded by 5K cameras with air conditioning and laptops and cameras. I'm like, what part of us is living in the tribe? So I always think, if you're one of those people that brings up the tribes analogy, unless you live in the tree and sling shit around and live in the savannah, that is an irrelevant thing. Like, you don't get to like get your phone and laptop out and live life as a 21st century human being, and then suddenly when it becomes things like male disposability, suddenly let's look at tribes, because we don't live as tribes. And human beings, as we are right now, we're defined by our ability to supersede nature. We don't just be, oh, well, that's just nature's design, let's keep going. And it's important to realise why we do see men as less valuable and their lives as more disposable, but we shouldn't use nature as a justification for it.
Yeah, I don't think it's a justification when I'm thinking about it, right? I think it comes down to consciousness about it, right? I think I think it's naive, because I'm also an atheist, right? Like, I don't have any particular religious belief. I'm agnostic too, but I'm an agnostic atheist, meaning, and I love the nuance around the definition, right? So for those who might not know, agnosticism is a claim that the question of whether a God exists or gods exist is unknowable, right? Is an unknowable question. Nobody can make a strong claim to have a knowledge, epistemological validation that any type of God exists, right? So you have to say, I'm agnostic about the question, but you also can have a belief as well, right? Some people can say, I'm an agnostic believer in some God, and some people say, I'm an agnostic atheist, and I fall in that latter camp where I don't have a particular God belief. So I'm saying I don't believe gods exist, but I'm also agnostic about the question. I don't think it's a knowable question. You can have just a belief about it. That's kind of where I don't know if you have a different definition, but that's the one I work with.
I mean, I'd say I don't know, and you don't know. No one knows. I feel like a lot of the atheists I speak to seem to lack imagination a little bit. And by no means do I think God is some guy with a toga and sandals walking around in the clouds. But I don't know what we don't know. Like, the fact is, about 97% of the universe is we just do not know what it is. It's a combination of dark energy and dark matter. And not only can we not see it, but we just don't even know what it is. We don't even know what makes up that part of the universe. So if you can, with 100% certainty, say, I'm an atheist and I know there is no God, I'm like, you just sound the same as people that say there is a God. And I'm like, unless you say, I don't know, and you don't know, no one knows, I feel like you're quite an arrogant person, perhaps.
I tend to agree. I think that's a different category called strong atheism, right? That's I'm making a strong claim that gods cannot exist. It's impossible.
But even Dawkins doesn't claim to be I think he said, if you measured atheism from 1 to 7, he's a 6 out of 7 in terms of certainty.
Oh, really?
So I
didn't hear that.
Yeah, I think it's in his God Delusion book. And he's like, I'm not saying 100% sure. So maybe I don't understand atheism. Maybe I am an atheist. All I'm saying is that I don't know how we got here. I'm confident it's not through the classic biblical texts of sort of modern religions.
Correct. And I think we share that in common. And I'm not a Reddit atheist, right? Like, I'm not somebody who goes out there and has arguments with people and tries to shit on people that have a particular belief. I think that's, number one, a dick move. Like, why are you doing it? Why are you kicking over somebody's sandcastles? Yeah. Particularly, and I think I've heard Alex O'Connor talk about this. Like, he's come around a lot to the utility of religion. Like, there's actually a benefit to people, right? Like, for example, if you believe that a God exists and they care about you personally and they're directing your path, you might be more bold, right? You might have less anxiety. You might step forward into, trying to do various type of things where you'd be successful because of that belief, right? And also there's the cultural component too. I think there's a lot of cohesion that comes with a shared religious belief and that embeds in the culture. And I think ripping down those structures, and Nietzsche had it right? Like God is dead, right? What was the second part of that? Is that, and there will not be enough, there's not enough water in the world to wash away the blood that's going to be on our hands, right? And he predicted the 20th century with communist China and the Soviet Union. He's a very smart dude. You can't rip down these structures without having something to replace it with. And I think that's a large part of what the world is struggling with right now, is that we have seen decline in belief, right? And we have seen a whole bunch of neuroticism about this. The world is getting more and more neurotic. And I think there's multiple reasons for it. But I do believe the reduction in religiosity and religious belief tends to lead towards more anxious people. If like this is all a cosmic accident and I don't know, and have that sort of, transcendent grounding for your life and some moral framework that you can, because you don't have to think about it, right? A lot of people shit on religious people because, you're simpletons, you're simplistic, but ultimately it is a fairly functional framework.
It's a lot of things, a lot of people. Let's put it that way. I mean, yeah, it's a really important part of like community cohesion and belonging. And yet it also does incredible amount of harm, especially when it's intertwined with politics.
Correct.
And education. And ultimately, I might believe whatever you want, do whatever you like, pray to whichever God you choose. Just don't bring it to schools and don't bring it to politics. Like, that's your private life and you're welcome to it. And certainly don't use it as a means of invading the bodily integrity or human rights of another person, such as circumcision. Like, that's where I draw the line. I'm like, you can believe whatever you want, but as soon as it starts impacting other people, then I have less sympathy for it. I think, yeah.
Completely agree. And so let's talk about that a little bit. This is interesting. So if you're an atheist, you have no particular God belief, you're an agnostic, you don't really know, right? Where do you drive your ethics from then? Because you have very strong stances. You talk about human rights and like you can't violate the bodily integrity of somebody. Why?
Where do I get my personal ethics from?
Where's your framework that sort of guides right and wrong? Like I get this, we talked about this off camera. Like we got a very strong sense of outrage around things you perceive as being wrong, right? And like I love that, right? I really love that. So I want to know, like, where's that grounded?
From my parents. My parents gave me a strong moral understanding of the world. Especially my mum, I think. Like, she's very sensible, smart. Both my parents, incredibly smart. Thoughtful, compassionate, not religious. My mum came from a religious family, my dad didn't. I wouldn't say even were religious. And yeah, I guess, I have no idea where I got my moral framework from, and I guess it's something that's constantly adapting, I'm constantly learning, I'm deciding what adding things to it and taking things away. And I feel like you get it from everywhere. I get it from you, I get it from my parents, my friends, my family, my education. I was educated in a religious school, Church of England school, and they said horrible things about, they said things that genuinely terrified me about hell, heaven and hell. And I'm like, if that happened to my child now, I don't have a child, but if my child came back and told me what I had learned, I'd be like, I need to go down and speak to the teachers that have been saying this so inappropriate. And like I said, like take religion out of school, take it out of politics. And I don't know, I have a lot of faith in the inherent moral goodness of human beings. Certainly not all human beings, but I don't necessarily think, I can't put my finger on where I get my moral framework. And I don't think I've not stopped building it. It's constantly a work in progress. Got it.
The reason I'm asking, because I hear somebody say rights, and the question I always ask is like, well, where do your rights come from? How do you know you have them? Like, where are they from?
Well, the Constitution for you. And,
that's not my view, but some people believe that. Some people, there's basically three schools really. One is that they come from God, right? God has endowed you with certain rights, right? That's the Christian view, maybe the Muslim view.
What does that mean? How does that mean for people like me that don't believe in God?
Sure. And then there's the other camp, which is they're part of your humanity. There's a lot of people that are both either religious or atheist, but can reason out from first principles that you have some sort of property in your body, right? Like you own your body. You control this meat machine, and nobody else can violate it, right? Without committing, some sort of a transgression. They can't, rape you. They can't punch you in the face. They can't stab you. There's a whole list of things they can't do to you, right? Yeah. By virtue of your humanity. And everything is reasoned from first principles, right? So you have to make at least one, assumption, right? You have to assume something is true in every moral framework, whether that's the existence of a God and that's where they come from, or whether they come from your humanity. But there's a third camp, which is like rights don't exist. they're a social construct and they come from government, right? Like a constitution or some governing document, and they don't, at that point they don't actually exist, right? Because they're kind of invented. And so for me, that's why I was poking. It's like, where do they come from? Like, are they actually inviolable? Like, can you violate somebody's bodily integrity if your government charter says that it's okay? I feel like you don't believe that.
Well, I feel like all roads end in the same place, and they came from human hands. I don't believe the Bible and its moral framework was written by the Holy Ghost. I believe it was written by a human being. Mm-hmm. So if we are saying that our morality and ethics come from the Bible or any religious text, well, then I just think cut out the middleman and just say human beings, because that's who I think wrote the Bible. The Constitution, the Magna Carta, various different political documents were also written by human beings. So I mean, it's not a particularly exciting argument, but I just feel like we create our own moral framework and we continually revising it for better or for worse as life goes on. It's not a fixed, definitive thing. It's not a static object, morality, and it's also subjective, and it's very difficult to get right or wrong. It's not an absolute. And yeah, I don't believe it's some sort of spiritual Holy Ghost that's blessed us with it, and I don't believe it comes from the monolithic government. I just think it comes from a lot of people talking constantly like this, having well-meaning discussions, and then someone writing it down.
Right, and I tend to align, except for I think I have a differentiator where I look at morality and ethics completely different. I think what you're describing is morality. It's like this sort of cultural thing that emerges, right? Like human beings in a group sort of interact with each other and determine what they think is good and bad. But there's a second camp for me, which is ethics, which is literally the study of, what you can and can't do to somebody, right? Like these are, in my view, inviolable principles, which is why I asked you, like, let's say the government in the Philippines says circumcision, A-okay. I think the ethical framework I'm working from says, no, that violates a human being's bodily integrity, and that is universally wrong, right? Across the board, regardless of what the culture is, regardless what their government documents say. And that's kind of where I'm working from. And I don't know why I went on this tangent, but it's an interesting topic for me.
I don't buy into the whole subjective approach to ethics, where what's ethical here is not ethical smart man. There are such things, in my opinion, as objective ethics, and it doesn't matter what culture you come from. It reminds me a little bit of the Dalai Lama. I don't know if you saw it recently, maybe 2 years ago. Here's a video of him telling a young boy to kiss my tongue, or suck my tongue. Yeah. Basically pressuring a young boy to kiss him. And it was, people fell into two camps for that. People were like, that is horrible. That is a massive invasion, massive abuse of his position of power, and basically coercion, sexual abuse of a boy. I'm in that camp. And then there was an emerging camp that was like, oh, you're looking at this through your Eurocentric Western point of view, and you don't understand the morality, the cultural ethics of this space. I'm like, no, that is just the exact sort of apologia that allowed members of the Christian church to do the exact same thing. Yep. And we were like, oh no, we don't understand we don't understand, we're not the right persons to interpret it. And it's just it's sort of part of this very negative view of the West, where we're always learning from someone else. And I'm like, actually, we can be the ethical leaders in the world, and we can say that what happened to Dalai Lama did was wrong, and objectively wrong from a human point of view. And I was really appalled by how many people, especially in my own circle, were somehow trying to explain it away as if I didn't understand because of my Eurocentric Western point of view. I just don't know. I'm like, no, that's bullshit. Right. Like, that is not right, and it's not right objectively speaking in any culture, and we should not try and absolve him of responsibility. I imagine nothing happened to him. He's still doing his bit.
Dalai Lama, right?
Yeah, he's doing his bit.
Well, yeah, that's enough of a detour, man. That's just a topic that's super interesting because I see you into politics now. Like I saw the mail-in postcard thing. That was a cool campaign trying to get MPs for boys and men. That was a cool thing, and I'm not saying there's no utility in that. But for me, I'm skeptical of government. Right? Like I've seen. I'm too old, man. I'm almost 50. I've seen. And I used to believe that government could solve problems, and now I'm kind of like, you know what? I think conversations like we're having, we can do this without anyone's permission, right? Like, I think there's so much good that human beings can do, and people get paralyzed because they're brainwashed into this idea. I don't know where it comes from, that government is the solution to all your problems. And if you just convince somebody to write a law, everything is going to be okay. And I think it abdicates responsibility, where people in communities can have these conversations, can move the needle, can change people's minds. We can do a whole lot of good. And people are just waiting for some bureaucrat to do it for them. And I don't vibe with that at all.
Yeah, it spins my head a little bit. I don't understand, because I mean, my fellow lefty young sort of champagne liberals in London, they're all very pro-socialism. I'm pro-socialism in some ways, but I'm also very pro-small government. And I don't understand how the young on the left can be so in favour of socialist when it basically means giving more power to government. I'm like, if our adult life has been like marred by one thing, it's government incompetence. Like my entire life, I've seen a government that's completely incompetent. So the idea of giving them more power is just like, no, thanks, no.
Well, are they actually incompetent though? This is a question. Yeah, because I think the question might be, it might be a situation. This is actually my claim. That's not actually incompetent, is you don't know who their clients are, right? You're looking at it thinking that they're serving the people, and really it's the moneyed interests, it's the billionaires, it's the rich connected people that use them to put their thumb on the scale in their favor. And so it's like, you just might not know who they're working for.
Well, I guess either way, giving them more power, whether it's incompetency or sort of being corrupt, it all ends the same. It means the same to me, and I'm cautious on giving them too much power. But then at the same time, I do feel like there are certain things where, like water, I think the UK is one of the only places in the world that actually water is managed by a private company, Thames Water, and it is horrendous what they're doing. And that is such a great example of the dangers of capitalism. So like all things, a bit of both. Like I'm pro-socialism, I'm pro-capitalism, but I also feel like capitalism needs to be reformed, maybe more along the lines of like the German Rhine capitalism, where you got a free market, but it's underpinned by a strong social network, like a strong state. But yeah, I'm grateful I don't have to make these decisions. It's not my job.
Well, I think you're doing much more good with what you're working on right now.
I do, but just position into an area of expertise where I probably can comment more so that, do we need a minister for men and boys? Do we need some sort of governmental figure? And yeah, absolutely, yes, we do. Does that mean we can't do good from a grassroots level? No, of course. Like I guess I am a living proof of that, where I've got no government funding. I've not received a single penny from the government for any of this. I do it just out of need, and I feel like there are others like me, such as yourself, and many thousands of people that follow me that want to do good, don't require any government funding, and doing it because of their moral framework. And that's great. I feel like that is the short term, especially, that is the solution for men and boys. Like anyone after this podcast can pick up their phone, call a mate, call a male friend and ask how they're doing. Call your brother, call your dad, call your granddad, call your son, your uncle, your whatever. And that's a grassroots thing we can do now. It doesn't require any government funding whatsoever. That said, there are also areas where we do need government funding, and that is just to work out what the fuck is going on. Like why the hell? Why are boys so far behind in school? It's a great question. Like, it's interesting because I've got a lot of strong opinions on that as well. And there are so many different areas where different groups are behind education. So black students are typically behind white students. The working class are behind the middle class. State schools are behind private schools. City schools are behind sort of more rural schools. There are loads of gaps, but there's also the boy-girl gap, which is probably the biggest one. And it's unique in the sense that we don't really know why boys are behind. Like, we know why state schools are behind private schools, and we may not like that reason, but we know what it is, why it is. But boys and girls are unique in the sense that they're boys and girls from the same family, of the same race, same socio-economic background, going often to the same schools, and yet girls are doing better than the boys. Like, I went to all the same schools as my sister, same family, same everything. She did way better than me. So there's something, a lot of these different variables are being controlled, and yet there's still a gap. So even the best minds in the world, best political minds in this area, like Richard Reeves, for example, he has no idea. He's only got ideas and suggestions, and he doesn't know because no one's asking the questions. So there's a need for someone to ask us questions from a high level, and that needs to be funded, and it needs to be politically motivated, and there needs to be a minister for men to investigate why are boys behind in school, amongst the many other issues. So I don't think it's too much to ask for both. Like, I want bottom down and bottom up and top down, I think. Yeah, that's great. And I think people don't realize this oftentimes. And I think we're seeing this in not just men and boys performing in school, but look in the workplace, right? You've had this big DEI push to equalize gender, equalize race, do a bunch of other things from a metric standpoint. And now I think you've seen the pendulum swing the other way. And we're not in Title IX days anymore. No. Like, we've actually, and I think you have some data on this, right? Like how things have flipped since then, right? Sticking to education. as we know, in like 1973, I think Title IX was brought in partly to address the underrepresentation of women and girls in education, especially higher education. I think it was like 39% of people enrolling to college were women in its early 70s. Title IX and a series of other sort of political programs and campaigns brought in to address that. That started in 1973. By 1981, we've arrived at 50-50. At that point, it's sort of time to start considering giving ourselves a pat on the back. Well done, we've done it. And then take our foot off the gas. But we never took our foot off the gas, and we carried on going, and the pendulum has swung too far, and now we've gone beyond equality, and we've even gone beyond where we were, but inverted. So by that I mean women and girls are further ahead in education than men and boys were 50 years ago. It's the same problem, but flipped, plus interest. And where it's not the same is that where is the Title IX for boy? Where is the same political ambition? I didn't see anything. I haven't seen anything in any of Kamala's or Donald's campaigning about boys in education, and I don't expect to see any. And same with this country. Like, where is the campaigning for boys and men?
You can't.
Politically,
it's toxic. You can't do that.
How could we say we live in a patriarchy, but while simultaneously saying that advocacy for men and boys is like committing political suicide? Like, how?
Well, I think it's because the belief that we live in a patriarchy, right? Because if you believe that this is a patriarchy, why are you helping the patriarchy?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Like, that's literally the thought that goes into it.
And like, why are women voting for it? Like, why? Like, if women outnumber men, everyone talks about power dynamics, and there is power held by the person that sits in office. But I would say there's more power held by the person who puts them in office. Like, and who owns electoral power? Who votes more in every single election? It's women. Mm-hmm. Women in America, and good for them, have outvoted have cast more votes than men every single election for maybe 40 years. So they have the power. They are the biggest voting bloc, and they can put whoever they want in office, but they don't. So what are they voting for? The patriarchy? Is that what you're saying? And the answer is obviously not, because the system of government in America is not a patriarchy, in my opinion. And if it were, surely things like boys in education, male victims of abuse, male suicide, men's health, they would be like first, second, third on the agenda, but they're not. There is no agenda for boys and men. But there was a Biden agenda for women and girls, and like politicians, quite rightly so, place a lot of value in advocating for women's issues, women's health. Biden has just opened up the eighth governmental department for women's health, the White House Initiative of Women and Girls, to join the various others that are about prioritizing women's health in America. Understandable. But none of those exist for men. There are no governmental departments for men's health, none of them. But there's 8 for women and girls, 0 for men, significant amounts of funding, tens of millions of dollars every year spent on women's health, not the same spent for men and boys. And yet men and boys' health is dreadful. Like, if I were to line up the top 15 causes of death in America, men lead in 14 of them. So pretty much a full house. And they die at nearly 1.5 times the rate as women, more likely to die at every age group for their entire life. And they are have worse health outcomes than women in every single ethnic, racial, socioeconomic group. Like, it's just all bad. And yet you would have thought the patriarchy would be like, that's number one priority, and it's not. There is no, like I said, there is no governmental department for men's health, no funding, no commitments, no policies. So what sort of patriarchy is that? Like, why is it backfiring so often? Like, it doesn't make sense. It's not good enough, and it needs to be left behind. There certainly were elements of patriarchal government in the past, and there still are now, especially in other parts of the world, but we need to be a little bit more grown up, I think, and detailed.
Yeah, I think that's a problem with a lot of this critical social justice stuff, is the mantra, and you've heard this, is the work is never done. Like,
no.
They're, as you mentioned, power dynamics is really what underpins critical social justice. They believe there's no such thing as objective truth, and that everything is power games between people, and so that's what it ends up being, right? And if you look through that lens, it's kind of depressing, but you kind of see the playbook at that point. There is no, like, you and I, we're very rational people, right? We want to sit and think through things and assume that the best intentions in people.
Yeah.
But some people don't have good intentions, man.
It's very not very charitable, I'd say. I mean, it's very similar to the religious argument. Like, I've sat across the table with religious people arguing about the existence of God, and I've talked to them about evolution, for example. Like, they're like, well, God created the world 10,000 years ago. And I'm like, well, here's a fossil that is millions of years old, millions and millions of years old. How could that possibly be? And instead of using that fossil as a way of honestly examining their own beliefs, they'll change their beliefs so it still works. So, God planted the fossils.
He's tricking us.
To trick you. And I'm like, that's the same bullshit I hear when I talk about patriarchy. Yeah. I'm like, well, if we live in a patriarchy, why are so many men dying young? Like, why are 2 in 5 deaths? Why do 2 in 5 men die young in this country if we live in a patriarchy? And then people will just do the same like mental gymnastic backward somersault as the fossil thing. They'll say, the patriarchy backfired. And I'm like, of course it did. I'm like, what? If it's so oppressive, why the fuck is it backfiring so much?
It's not very good. And it's not very competent if it's really in power.
No, and it's just not an honest examination of your political beliefs. Like, as a scientist, I love the scientific method where you present an idea and then everyone in your group tries to falsify it. Like, science advances by falsifying itself. It presents an idea, and if no one can prove you wrong, that's accepted for the time being until something else comes along. But around patriarchy, it's not the same. You don't try and falsify the patriarchy theory. In fact, you do the opposite. We change the theory to stop it from being falsified. And there's no space for that in social advocacy. It's just dishonest, and it's very subjective, and it doesn't expose itself to the same rigor as a scientific method. And it's more akin to a religion in the way in which
very much so.
Is feminism more like a religion? And it's like, that's a controversial question.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things there. Like, number one, the patriarchy discussion. I think it's somewhat disrespectful to all the women that we have as governors and senators and Congress people. Like, we have a woman running for president right now. Like, like to say that we have this patriarchal structure that's all male, like that's ridiculous on its face, and it's a little bit disrespectful. The other thing that's important to note is the outcomes, like you said. Like, I was looking at this tweet here. He responded to Elon when he was posting about the number of people that are cable installers, road builders, constructions, garbage, iron workers, and it's all in the high 90%. And you called out that you said because 4,500 men die every year doing such jobs, which is about 96% of all workplace deaths attributed to men. Nobody seems to care.
No. I mean, I think people do care. They don't. It's not a failure of caring, because the people that do tell that, if you tell 10 people on the street that, they would mostly, they all care, but they don't know it. And people that
do they though?
No, I don't think they do. Like, no. So, given context of that tweet, someone asked Elon, who is now the overlord of all political discussion. Someone asked Elon, why do feminists not care about increasing representation of women in things like fishing, lorry driving, construction work, bricklaying, garbage disposal? And it's a good question. I answered it because I think I'm more qualified than he is. And I was like, well, because those are dangerous jobs. And like men, one of the reasons why men do get paid more is because they do more dangerous jobs, more dirty jobs, more dangerous, difficult, physically laborious jobs, of which are named, and they come at the cost of life. And not in small means. Like in America, 4,500 men die at work every single year, which is about 95% of all workplace deaths. And if you actually look at the numbers, that is more deaths than the entire military losses from the 20 years of Iraq War. So more men die at work every year after year after year, than all of the American military deaths in the Iraq War. And that's not to minimise the toll paid by the American military, but it's just to shine a light on this is another war going on, the war of work, which no one's doing anything. And once again, the Bureau of Labor, I believe it's called, has a women's bureau in America. So there is a women's bureau, and that's all about protecting women at work, making sure women have safe environments to work, and looking at things like parental leave, which is a worthy thing, but that doesn't exist for men. And I would have thought it would have existed for men first. If men are the ones that are paying the biggest price for work, right. Where the hell was the men's bureau? And it's like that patriarchy backfired once again.
Yeah, and let's also tell me about suicide rates too.
Suicide, well, unfortunately, I mean, you're coming towards the end of the window, but every single day a man lives, the biggest risk to his life is suicide. Every single day. So today, tomorrow, the following day, every single day, for every single man until the age of 50. And even beyond that now, like, it's getting worse and worse and worse. So in terms of national priorities, male suicide has to be one of them. Again, there's very little said or done about it, and what is said and done is so limited and unhelpful and just objectively wrong that it's in many ways worse than nothing, because it's distracting. But male suicide, although it's not gotten better, it has been addressed. So the numbers are still going up. but yet campaigning is increasing. So the campaigning is clearly ineffective, and the campaigning is largely around blaming men for male suicide. Be less toxic, talk more, cry a little bit. And it basically makes a suggestion that male suicide is some sort of psychological problem, mental health problem inside of men's heads that needs to be corrected through being medicated or talking a little bit more, exercising your toxic masculinity, and the nonsense. Although mental health does play a big role in male suicide, more of a moderating role. It's not the primary cause of male suicide, and most men who are suicidal don't consider themselves as having a mental health problem at all. They have like a financial problem, or work-based problem, or a relationship problem, or child custody problems, a big one, or physical health problem. And the reason they take their lives is not because they're not thinking rationally, and it's not because of that some sort of toxic masculinity. It's because they have a real problem that they can't deal with. They've lost a job, they've lost a child in custody, they've broken up with their wife, or they've had some sort of bereavement, and they're dealing with a problem that is actually, in many ways, rational. A lot of the people I know that work in male suicide research, they listen to the men, and a lot of the time they think, I'm not surprised you don't want to be here anymore. Your life sounds really difficult. And it's not right for someone to say, you're just mentally unwell, because they're not mentally unwell. They're actually, a lot of time, responding in a way that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's about time we start seeing suicide not as an irrational decision, but more as a solution-based outcome. I've seen it described.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to solve their problem. And it just shows that the constant advocacy for talk and tears is not going to solve their problems, because they can't cry away debt or joblessness or relationship breakdown or domestic violence. The real causes. And the only reason we say men can cry is because it's easy. It's easy. It makes us look good. And it places the blame at the feet of men. It places the blame, this is your fault, and you're the one, and that anyone that spent any time with suicidal men would know that the idea of it being a mental health problem primarily is not right. And it's about time we left that model behind and started to see men's distress as shaped by society, structural causes, just like women's. And we're just not doing that, because that's unpopular work. It's unpopular to say, hey, did you know 11% of men who are being abused will consider taking their life? There are nearly 5 million abused men in this country. So if 10% of them are at risk of suicide, that's a huge problem. And then that's a systemic problem. That's not some sort of personal sort of failing or internal problem within them. That's him not being helped, because there is no help for male victims. And that's our fault. And he can't cry that away. So instead of continually asking men to talk, I think it's time that we listen to them and asked how they're doing and acted on what they've got to tell us. And until we do that, I don't think anything's going to be solved. It'll probably get worse, and it has been getting worse.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote that you posted. Women have problems, men are problems.
Yeah, pretty much. So I'm very much on the belief that women do have problems, and those problems are largely from out there in society, and they don't really have a huge amount of control over them. Same for men. People don't seem to think that men have the same experience as that. They seem to think that they are the architects and authors of their own pain, and therefore any solution has to come from themselves. And I was like, but no, suicidal men are not powerful men. They're not like immersed in power and privilege. They're they're lonely, extremely mentally unwell, often dealing with very difficult problems. What the fuck are you talking about? And the fact that you dare call a suicidal man toxic is just... And especially when a psychologist is doing that. There are clinical psychologists that I know that genuinely believe that toxic masculinity causes male suicide. And I hope to God they're not working with vulnerable men. Because the idea of a suicidal man going to that clinical psychologist and opening up about things suicide, and then to be called toxic and to be blamed for your impact, it's just that is such a betrayal that goes beyond just sort of ignorance, because it's sort of a qualified person apparently. And I'm like, that is shameful. And I've compared that to how we pathologise femininity with female hysteria in the past, where a distressed woman, we would say she's mentally unwell and she's hysterical and she needs to be subjected to these ridiculous medical experiments. Whereas she's actually not hysterical. She's just acting in a way where she's showing her distress, and we're not ready to hear it. So I guess, I have asked, and I do think it's a question, is toxic masculinity the modern equivalent of female hysteria? And it's like that is and are we going to look back at these days with the same shame as we look back 100 years at what we did to women? the so-called hysterical women.
I hope so, because from my view, it's pretty abhorrent, the behavior that I'm seeing and the way that the attitudes that we have. It seems it's so in vogue to casually just shit on guys without even thinking that they're human beings. Yeah. It's a very, very gross thing to watch.
I know, I see some people dipping their toes into the areas of male advocacy. I saw a post recently by Clementine Morrigan, who's a great writer, and she did a post about men, and she was saying things like, men are human too. And I'm like, that is true, but fucking hell, that is low. That is square one. That is like, just reminding men are human is the very base level of advocacy, and somehow that, just saying men are human to some, that's too much.
Yes, controversial.
That's too much. Like, you've gone too far there. It's like men deserve compassion. It's like, whoa, that is, and the fact that we think showing compassion or kindness to men is wrong or somehow misogynistic is a damning indictment of the problem itself, where we not only have the problems that men experience, but the solutions to those problems are often out of limits because they're too popular. Like the antidote to men's pain is also off. Like it's very difficult. It's like that two-tiered problem of the problem itself, male suicide, but then also the secondary tier. Any discussion around it is seen as anti-women or misogynistic, harmful, and like there's sort of a gatekeeping, often by people that aren't even men, and it's not right. And men should be able to have this conversation in their own right. The discussion of male suicide needs to be led by and centered around suicidal men and bereaved families and no one else. Like, take politics out of it and listen to men. Stop telling them to talk and then not listening to what they've got to say.
Right.
And like, it's down to all of us to solve that problem because we're all part of society.
Well, kudos to you. You're really courageous. I watch a lot of your back and forths on Twitter in particular, and it gets pretty spicy at times. And one of the reasons, like you call it kissing the ring. Yeah. You don't do that, and I think that bravo to you, because I see so many people in this space that want to talk about men's issues that first have to do the preamble, the 90-second preamble that like, hey, no, this is we care about women. Like, you have to caveat this, and where you can't just say, here's an issue that I see, and this goes to your discussion of gendered issues, right? Like, maybe talk to me about that. Talk to me about gendered issues.
Honestly, it's a bit like patriarchy theory, where there are these sort of political neologisms that I don't know what it really means. I don't know what the patriarchy means, because every time I ask someone, it's something different. Gendered issues, I don't really know what that means either, because it's constantly shifting, and that's why it's also not scientific, because science has to be objective. But what I understand gendered issues to be are things like domestic violence, where people claim it disproportionately impacts women and girls more, and in some ways it does, and that makes it gendered. So hypothetically, as long as it tips over that 50% mark, if it disproportionately impacts women and girls, it's gendered. It only goes one way. So the many, many issues that I talk about, such as homelessness, they're not seen as gendered the opposite way, even though the disparity is far greater. Like 9 in 10 homeless deaths are men. That's not gendered. But then a much bigger wedge is erased in domestic violence, where 1 in 3 victims is male, and he's just erased. So I'm not in favour of erasing homeless women, and I'm also not in favour of erasing abused men. And I fundamentally believe in looking at social issues in a way that sort of a rising tide lifts all boats. So if we just look at social issues like domestic violence, and we treat it as just a broad, neutral social issue, any group within that who's being disproportionately impacted will naturally be disproportionately benefited. So if we help all the victims of abuse, and if two of every 3 victims of abuse is a woman, then they will receive 2/3 of the support, if we look at it in a neutral way. So I'm more in favour of societal issues. I mean, I'm left-wing because I thought that's what we're all about, but clearly it's not. It seems to be more about just dividing people into tribes and turning those tribes against each other. Meanwhile, the biggest divide of them all, meaning class, is just completely ignored. And no one looks at class. Everyone's more interested in sort of arbitrary things, such as gender, race, sex, sexuality. And class, the biggest divide of them all, gets a free pass. It's balmy.
So how do you move forward? Because one of the things I'm interested in, the real focus of this podcast, is making the world a better place through conversations like this, right? So if we're aiming the same direction and we want to improve some of these issues, how do you do it without being divisive? Right? Like, how do you, like you say, always say, look at the issue, not the gender, right? Like how do we approach these things together? is there a way to build a coalition? Like, and are you going to have to maybe team up with some people that are not on your team politically? Like, it feels like there's such a disjointed and fractured coalition around men's issue. It feels like anyone who's talking about it for the most part is on the right. And so, like, how do we productively move forward? Because it feels like a lot of these discussions online just end up devolving into people shouting at each other.
Yeah,
and I'm just like interested in like, man, how can we more productively? Like, who's an ally potentially? Who can we reach out to that like might be reasonable and listen? Because there's a lot of people that won't, and you can't get to them. As you claimed before, like somebody who hasn't been reasoned into their position can't be reasoned out of it. And I think a lot of these folks aren't reasoned, right? So like, how do we move forward? Like, I'm really interested in figuring out ways, because otherwise it feels like we're all just screaming into the void. There's like a couple of pinpoints of light in the darkness that are trying to raise these issues, and it's nothing but hate coming backwards, right? So
it's not for the faint-hearted, this area of advocacy. Now, if you want quick wins, go somewhere else, because there aren't many here. I feel like I have it even worse in many ways, because I have many allies. Like, I'm left-wing naturally. It's in my blood to be left. But the left have done a dreadful job. The worst of all was done by the left. They've completely betrayed men and boys, especially within feminist frameworks. Dreadful. So it's very difficult to be on the left and to see my own so-called allies doing such a dreadful job and actually making the situation worse. And then, like, you're very right. The right, certainly not perfect either. They're getting it more right than the left. So I find myself spending more time with people on the right, which I'm more than happy to do, but they're not my natural bedfellows.
Right.
And I feel like if the left is about social equality, then these are left-wing issues that the left are not interested in, because the left is also interested in looking good. And when you enter this whole like woke dynamic, where woke in general is like, I heard it described as more interested in looking good than doing good. And I promise you, men and boys advocacy does not look good. You may do lots of good by being an advocate for men and boys, but you won't look good. You won't get paid, you won't get brand deals or golden handshakes, there are no awards. I've been doing it long enough and I've not had any of that. So I feel like people in the space are more authentic. So yeah, I alienate myself straight away by being men and boys advocacy. I alienate myself from the left by refusing to talk about it in the way they talk about it. And I'm already alienated a little bit from the right, because I'm just not right wing. So it's a lonely experience. And then the people that are in my space, I find a lot of like grifters, liars, narcissists, bullies, like horrendous. Like,
Andrew Tate's of the world.
Andrew Tate.
Red pillars.
I've never met him, but there's loads of people lower level that are just dreadful men's rights activists, like just grifters. And I could probably count on one hand the people that I've met in the space that I genuinely feel are here for good reasons. And I've met many, many more who are here for the opposite reasons. So yeah, it's difficult. And because I refuse to rein in advocacy, the kissing the ring, as you put it, kissing the ring being where you offer a litany of apologies and disclaimers before you say anything positive about men and boys, you'd be like, well, we need to acknowledge that women and girls have it difficult too, and there are various things that need to talk about, and violence against women is important, and lots of girls are, you have to offer all these different, like, you're literally kissing the ring, you're paying penance to someone, God knows who, before you even arrive at the point, and like you're just undermining yourself, in my opinion. Like, you're just lessening your own point. It's shameful. And people say, advocating for men doesn't mean you're anti-women. I'm like, exactly. So stop saying it. Like, stop saying that. It reminds me of the whole, I'm not a racist, but. And so here comes a racist thing you're about to say. You're so full of shame. Like, I don't even think you should be in this space. There's nothing to be apologized for. There's nothing wrong with what I'm saying. And I shouldn't give credit to people that think there is something wrong, because I'm just trying to accommodate someone that doesn't want to be accommodated, and they're not here for a well-meaning discussion. I've talked to Richard Reeves about this as well. He offers too many apologies, in my opinion, too many disclaimers, and he plays a political game. He's getting tens of millions of dollars of funding now, which is great. So he does have to toe the party line a little bit, and he does have to kiss the ring. I don't have to kiss any ring, so I'll say exactly what I think, for better or for worse. I've asked him, like, why do you always say things like supporting men and boys makes them better allies for women and girls? Don't you understand that men and boys, the primary benefactor are men and boys, and there's nothing wrong with that? You shouldn't be framing it as benefit to women and girls. And he says he's trying to talk to women's interests. And I'm like, do you think women's interests are only for themselves, Richard? Like, because that is also a very dim view of women, quite a narcissistic view of women, which is not one I found. As someone that has tens of thousands of women follow me, I've yet to receive a message from a woman saying, how can these issues benefit me? I've never received that message, but I've received thousands of messages from women saying, how can I help men? How can I learn better to help men? And I don't think women and girls are interested in men and boys advocacy to benefit themselves, despite what Richard might claim. I think they're interested for the same reasons as men, because they care and they want to know more. So I don't think we need to be presenting men and boys advocacy as something it isn't. All that it is an important set of conversations for men and boys that needn't be apologised for or explained away. And it just leads to crazy sound. I read one a great example of kissing a ring, and it was like, we said about women and girls are behind in society, but men are overrepresented in every single thing that will kill you. And I'm like,
we're killing it.
Fuck! Like, can't you just say the second bit? Like, why do you have to constantly apologise for it? And that's where I feel like the next level of advocacy is. Stop apologising, stop rounding off your corners and watering it down. You're only hurting yourself, and ultimately there's no reason for it. Like, there's nothing to be apologised for.
Yeah, I agree. But also to Richard's point, or maybe this is why he's doing it, maybe there's a different reason, but I think it is important to not just say what this would do for women, but for society as a whole, right? Like, if you're looking at, you want to live in a better world, having good men, lots of good men, is a benefit for everybody, right? So I think making that argument has some utility.
It's true. I'm not saying it's not true. It's true, but that shouldn't be presented as the main reason for it, because then you're just leaning back onto the whole male disposability thing, where men don't deserve this. This is primarily deserving. Women are deserving of this. We should just women. And like, no, men are autonomous humans, and they deserve it too.
Now, I was looking more from a strategic perspective, right? Because, like, I get it. Like, they are, by the way, women, particularly young Gen Z women on TikTok, are fed a constant stream. I got 3 daughters. I see it. There's a constant stream of anti-male hatred that is just is ever present in the world, right? So counteracting that, providing maybe a different view, sometimes is helpful. But I also see a desire in young women, right? I hear from my girls and from their friends and everyone else that there's no good men out there. They're looking for a good partner and can't find it. Like the quality of men has declined, and no wonder, right? With all of the issues we've talked about, and not even having role models anymore. Like when I grew up, it was very easy to have male role models. Like growing up in the 1980s, like they were traditionally masculine role models. You could pick any number of people. And today there just doesn't seem to be any. Like we talked on our last episode when I think Chris was debating somebody, and he's like, well, who else would you suggest as a role model? And the guy couldn't come up with anything. It was like, well, my brother-in-law. And it's like, I think we need to have really good male role models, unapologetically so, that are setting a good example for people. And I think that is beneficial for all of society. And if it does change some minds, right? I'm a real pragmatist, right? If that argument changes some women's minds and shifts their frame, I'm okay with that, right? Like I just want less hatred towards men and boys and more, thinking of them as human beings. Like that's, God, it's so sad that we're at the basement here.
You are right that framing these issues of benefit to society will help people join, but I feel like that will only help short term. Long term, we need to recognise the fact that men and boys deserve this in their own right. Right? And that's what I am. I'm interested in long term change, and that's what I'm trying to do. But I mean, it's not that I don't recognise and share information about the wider benefits. It's just I don't want to lean too much into that. Like you talk about male role models, and there's a massive lack of them, and there absolutely is. There's also a massive lack of fathers at home. There's also a massive lack of male teachers in school. Dreadful portrayals of fatherhood on TV and TV sitcoms, cartoons. And then obviously, it's totally unsurprising that young men and boys will gravitate towards misogynists like Andrew Tate, who do speak positively of masculinity, but who are misogynists and a dreadful role model for men. Andrew Tate is clearly extremely insecure and just like the worst type of role model. But people like him will always exist, unfortunately. There will always be assholes in the world. The better question is, why are so many men and boys following him? That's the real problem. And the answer is, there's no one else to follow. Like, where the hell are the positive male role models for men, especially the masculine ones? Like, where are they? And that's a problem. And
I get it. I think he is Trump. It's the same thing. It's like you have these people that look to a strong man, right? Like they go, the person that for all their faults will just put both middle fingers up and be like, fuck you, and say all the crazy shit and push back. Like they view that as like, I can't say that, or I'm afraid to say that. But this person is like this avatar of what I want to be. And even though it's completely toxic and completely mental, the fact that that person will stand up and be the strong man, I think there's something deeply ingrained in our biology that resonates with that.
I mean, I watch stuff and I hate it when he makes me laugh. Because I'm just like, fuck. And sometimes, every now and again, like a broken clock, he is right. Very rarely. But I can see his appeal. Like, clearly he's doing something right. He's very charismatic. And I just think it's the more important, like I said, the more important lesson is why not anyone else? Like, why are so many following him? And if not him, where else? Like, we talk a lot about gangs, London. It's impossible to talk about London without talking about knife crime. And how serious it is. So many of his boys come from homes without dads, have no male role models. Like the link between fatherlessness and criminality is stark. And yeah, that's what happens to gangs. Like a boy has no father at home, no male teacher at school, surrounded by poor role models in his life, on the media, and he sees a sense of belonging elsewhere, which is a gang. He sees a sense of leadership or fatherhood elsewhere, and that's a gang. And he gets that purpose elsewhere. He's not getting it from anywhere else because we've taken it away from him. And he joins a gang instead. And that's why talking about these things, like men and boys advocacy, is a benefit to everyone, because we'd all benefit from reducing knife crime and gang violence. The overwhelming majority is by young men. And also like criminal exploitation. Like stop seeing gangs as just some sort of monolithic bad thing and start to see them as actual victims in their own right. Many are being exploited. Like the number one victim of modern slavery in this country right now, young men, particularly black men, who are brought into gangs and sort of county lines to basically be exploited, to carry drugs and other such things. And yeah, no one's talking about that either. So yeah, we'd all benefit.
Yeah, I completely agree. So getting short on time here, so we got to wrap up, but I wanted you to talk about what's next. I think I heard that you're potentially considering a documentary.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, next meaning fuck knows when, but I'd love to. Like, I am a professional filmmaker. I run my own company. I create documentaries specifically. I'm very interested in human testimony. I'm very much more confident on your side of the camera than mine. And I would love to make a documentary that captures the stories of men and summarizes these issues on camera with leading experts and people with lived experience through a documentary. Because I feel like that would be just bringing together my two skill sets. Mm-hmm. There's this newly developed one of men and boys advocacy and all the lessons I've learned through continually posting about it every single day. Because that's what it is. It's research and development. I'm like, well, how do we talk about these issues that everyone seems to hate in a way that is more resonant, more accepting, while simultaneously not rounding off the corners? And the way we describe, what combination of words or images will unlock compassion in people's minds and hearts for men and boys? What's the cheat code? I thought I'd have figured it out by now, but I haven't figured it out. And that's why it makes me think it's more of a biological thing, hence the tribes.
Right.
But it'd be wasted to develop that knowledge and then not to combine it with my skills as a filmmaker. But the problem with film, as you know, it's expensive, especially doing documentaries. And like you can't make a documentary for like less than like silly amounts of money. Like you need to make a feature length doc, it's £100,000 or more. And like there is no money for men and boys, so if anyone has £100,000, then I've got a great place to spend it. Up to his
Cash App or something.
But yeah, that's a long-term goal. We're talking like lifetime goals. So I'd love to make a documentary, and I have everything I need apart from the money. I have a crew, I have the skills. I think I have an understanding finally. So yeah, I'd love to do that, but many steps before that, I think, unfortunately.
Cool. I'd love to see that. So if you ever get that $100,000, man, I'm the first guy in line.
Yeah.
So
well, we'll start off with a few dollars and see what that gets me.
What's that money for? So I'm trying to think. Like, you're a filmmaker. You have the gear. You have the expertise, the lighting, all that stuff. Like, what's the money for?
There's other people, like other people's time. Like filmmaking is a group activity. It's like team sport. It's not a matter of me sitting here on my laptop for like a few hours and creating a post, where the cost of that is my time, and I'm happy to donate my time. But it's hard to find a crew who donate that amount of time at that level. Not to mention all the location hire, kit,
got it,
And there were just hard costs to film. Like all this kit isn't free.
Mm-hmm.
And although it's not huge, and I'm not trying to take a huge amount of money, there are costs that are not, you can't absorb. And there's an argument I shouldn't be doing it for free either. And I am slowly trying to work out a way in which I can make it some sort of financial income. Again, not in some exorbitant way, but like in a way that makes it sustainable for me. But film is just another level of expense. But I have got some plans, and hopefully we're not too far away.
Cool. Well, let me know how I can help.
Anytime, you're helping already by having me here, so I appreciate that.
I'm honored that you came on the show again, man. Good to see you in person finally. This is really, really great.
Well, you said you would, and you delivered.
I did. So anyway, we'll wrap it up. Tell everyone where they can find you.
You can find me at Thetinmen on various different social media platforms now. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Discord, Twitter, now Reddit as well. But Instagram is the main center point. So Thetinmen. And you can find all the other platforms and communities from there.
Awesome. Everybody go check them out.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
You're welcome.